I'm Leo Wallace. I'm the author of this book, Cities Are Good For You. I live in London, and I apologise for not speaking any Russian. So I live in London, and to write this book, I went many places around the world, looking at various different cities, looking at the ways that we live together. I'm thrilled to say that my book was translated into Russian by Strelka Press and came out earlier this year. So I hope that you'll be able to have a chance to see some of the other arguments that I make about the future of cities. But there's one thing that I really want to focus in on today. In a few weeks' time, many of the most important thinkers about the city, about sustainability, about housing, are going to meet in Quito, and they're going to discuss some of these incredibly important topics. They're going to try and come up with what they call is a new urban agenda. This is a document that will put together some of the action points, some of the shared thoughts about what the future of the city should be. And I want to read just one quick line that comes from the shared vision of this new urban agenda for Habitat 3. We share a vision of cities for all, referring to the equal use and enjoyment of cities and human settlements, seeking to promote inclusivity and ensure that all inhabitants of present and future generations, without any discrimination, are able to inhabit and produce a just, safe, healthy, accessible and affordable lives. This strikes me as a very important time to discuss these issues and to think about them not just as a political decision, but also about how we can change our lives. Now is the time that we need to ask the question, what kind of city do we want to live in? I believe that cities are good for us, and yet there are amazing changes that are going on in the urban world at the moment. It is very well known that in 2007 the world became 50% urban, so half the world's population lived in cities. It is now closer to 54%. By 2050, this number will go up to 75%, and by the end of the century, when the world's population is somewhere between 10.5 billion people, more than 85% of those people will live in cities. What will happen in the new century is going to be very interesting, because the process of urbanisation is actually going to stop the population rising, and slowly in the next century we're going to see population declining. And yet within our own lifetimes we're going to see an extraordinary change within the urban world. By 2060, more than 3 billion people will be living in informal slum living. If you think that every single day 180,000 people arrive somewhere in the world in order to make that place their home, one person every second moves from the countryside to the city. This is an extraordinary change. This is the last great human migration in our history. And yet when we think about those 3 billion people who will arrive at the city by 2050, these people will be living in very difficult circumstances, without the services or the basic necessities of everyday life, such as water, electricity, sewerage, education framework, and health. However, we have an opportunity. Not only can we have the discussions now about what kind of city we want to live in, but also it is estimated that 80% of the cities that will exist by the end of this century has not been built yet. That's an extraordinary thing to think about. that we have to build the city of the future in order to accommodate our urban lives. So at this moment, I think that we need to be smart. We need to think beyond the fact that the future might be, on one hand, a wonderful sci-fi, a techno-utopian future, but on the other hand, all we can ever really hope for is a future of slums. We have to be smarter than these two extreme choices. We need to ask new questions and not just look for a single solution. We need to adapt our thinking. And I personally believe that what we need to start doing is not just thinking about buildings, but the life between buildings. Because it's here that the city actually exists. I believe that cities can be good for us, but this is not necessarily the experience that we're living day to day. So many opportunities arise that allow the city to be a place where we can become richer, healthier, we can become even greener, more sustainable, and perhaps we might even become happier. But this is not inevitable. We've been thinking and building cities for nearly 9,000 years. This is the greatest experiment in human history, and this experiment has not ended yet. We're midway through the city, the idea of the city. This history has not ended with us. On top of that, I believe that we are meant to be together. We are hardwired to be social animals. And yet we consistently fail to develop the social fabric that allows us to work together, to come together and to flourish. So what do we do next? As we plan our future, and in particular our urban future, we have to be careful about the ways we think about the unforeseen consequences of our best intentions. Take, for example, the mobile phone. I'm sure you all now have a smartphone in your pocket. The mobile phone in the last decade has transformed urban living in the way that something like reinforced steel or even the railways changed urban living in previous generations. In 2007, 70% of the population in the world's core city owned a smartphone. Already this has totally transformed the way that we communicate, the way that we navigate around the city, the way that we transact, the way that we monitor ourselves through health apps, as well as each other. It also transforms the way that we find entertainment. It is possibly the most viable vehicle in the future for augmented reality, the way that we will layer the real world with information. In a decade, it has changed our brains, how we interact, the way we live, the objects that we have in our pockets, what we need to remember, and what we can now allow ourselves to forget. This simple mobile phone is the ultimate device in making our lives richer, more efficient. But in Chongqing in China, they have already developed mobile phone lanes. This means that people who have started to live their lives looking down, no longer aware of what's going on around themselves, we are having to change the city in order to accommodate these people. In a recent report from Australia, it showed that while most pedestrian injuries were on decline, amongst the young, in particular the 16 to 24-year-olds, there was a 10% rise in pedestrian accidents because of people texting and walking at the same time. This is the exact opposite of the optimised flow of bodies and information and goods that comes from the promise of the smart city. It looks at a much overlooked truth about the relationship between the city and the stories we tell ourselves when we talk about the future. It often appears that in this beautiful vision that the fatal flaw is in fact us. We are just too unpredictable, too human to fit in this perfect technological future. This world the greatest minds in Silicon Valley are creating for us. So when we think about the future of the city, we need to be careful that we do not design ourselves out of it, or forget about how important we are within the city. Because perhaps the most inefficient and unproductive part of the city of the future will be us. And yet, we are the most important thing there. I now want to look at 5 different scenarios about the future. These are 5 stories we're being told about the future of the city. The first is about how things are connected. In 2007, we reached the tipping point when more objects were connected to the internet than people. So in 2007, over 7 billion objects were connected to the internet. By 2010, another 10.5 billion objects were connected to the internet. This was from kettles that tweeted you when the water had come to the boil, or to phones and cars, to CCTV cameras and citywide sensors. By 2020, this figure will rise to 50 billion connected objects. This will include a market that is estimated to be worth $1.9 trillion. And this is why everyone is talking about this new connectivity of things. This is the beginning of an urban revolution that restitches the threads between us, the digital objects in our pockets, the places and the spaces where we dwell. This will cause a revolution that changes the way that we live, work, move and connect with each other, and even how we construct our own individual identities. This is called the Internet of Things. Very soon, the objects around us will monitor every aspect of our lives, searching for glitches and for inefficiencies that it will improve and design out. So, for example, we're already seeing the development of smart homes. This is a house that knows when you're close to arriving back, a fridge that orders your food, a medicine cabinet that checks your prescriptions. On a much larger scale, the smart house becomes the smart city. It monitors, engages, and sends data feeds in all directions that can control traffic, check water pressure, prepare for bad weather, predict crime hotspots. We are told the city is being transformed into a giant web of information, and this will allow for better decision-making. But I raise just one question about this new vision, despite the fact that it is undoubtedly going to make people very rich and some other people very informed. Who makes the decisions based upon this data, and who allows that data to be distributed? Secondly, big data is never going to be big enough in order to really predict the future. It can never actually predict what's going to happen next. It can only guess at it. Finally, smart cities will be controlled by who? Which major corporations will start to take the role of government? We will see a redistribution of power, but will that power necessarily come down to those people who are using the city rather than those people who own the city? The second narrative that I want to look at, which offers a completely different vision of the city, but still one based in the possibilities and the potentials of technology can be seen in the rise of artificial intelligence and the way that this will change the world of work. As computers get smarter and algorithms get more complex, we'll see computers taking over more tasks that were once handled by us. Some thinkers are starting to plan and already analyse what a world post-work might look like. What would happen to the city when fewer people actually need to go to work than before? The thinker, Yuval Noah Harari, in his new book, Homo Deus, which looks at the problems of the rise of AI, sees a development of what he calls a vast, useless class. These are people who no longer are part of the economy because of the rise of AI. Now, one has to question Harari's assumptions. Why useless? Nonetheless, what is definitely going to be true is there's going to be large sections of society who will no longer have work or need to work. And as urbanists, we need to ask, how does this affect the city? If people come to the city in order to find jobs, in order to work, will they come anymore? Will cities no longer have to be places where people congregate, where people have creative ideas? Instead of work, what will people be allowed to do? And what will be the benefits of allowing AI to take over the mundane tasks of the city? Can this post-work world, this post-work city, offer an alternative, or will it produce what one can only see as an increasingly divided city? The third vision of the future city is one I think we all can recognise. This is a city that is under threat from climate change. But I want to make quickly 2 points here. Climate change within the urban landscape, within the city, is not felt equally. It affects the poor first and most severely. This is true in terms of air pollution, of flooding, of poor housing quality. Yet I have one glimmer of hope, which is that the city, while it is the source of the problem, it could also be the source of the solution, and we'll return to this later. The next way of thinking about the future city is the question of mobility, how we move around the city. The idea of infrastructure is absolutely central to the way a city is planned, a way that the city runs day to day. And I offer 3 different ways in which we are on the cusp of changing the cities that we live in. The first is replacing petrol cars with electric and hybrid cars. We've already seen these on the roads. This is a useful innovation, certainly, but it doesn't necessarily force a behavioural change. It doesn't change our streetscape. I've been walking around St. Petersburg over the last couple of days, and it's been very interesting to see the places which have been planned with cars in mind and which have not. And you should see where cars haven't been planned, they often take the space, or public space. They often invade the places where other things should be going on. I think this is true in every major city, that cars take up a vast amount of space. There is something called Jevons paradox, which was invented by a 19th century engineer who said, if you improve an engine by 100%, people are likely to use that engine more rather than reduce the usage. And I think that is very true of what we see in terms of electric and hybrid cars. When we think about mobility, we must think about how to change people's behaviour. The second thing that I think we need to think about in terms of mobility in the future city is the development of proper public transport systems, both buses, trams, taxis and trains. This is not just a means in order to get people across cities, but this is a potential way of transforming the city. The previous mayor of Bogota in Colombia, a man called Enrique Peñalosa, saw that within his city, the top 19% of society were people who owned all the cars. So 80% of people could not afford a car. And yet roads took up 45% of the whole city. Therefore, there was an unequal sharing of the city space between those who had cars and those who didn't. Often these cars were parked on the pavement as well. So Enrique Peñalosa committed himself to creating a bus service called the BRT that not only would transport those in need, those without cars across the city, but be so efficient and so good that those who even had cars would want to use it. And very quickly one saw that the way that people shared the road completely changed. And as a result, the air pollution improved. The people started to share buses together. There was a social as well as a climate change result of this simple thinking through of buses. The third question about mobility is, of course, driverless cars, which I think we will probably see on our roads within 10 to 20 years. Earlier this year, I went to Silicon Valley and went to visit the Google lab and saw one of these driving around the car parks. The people who are developing this new technology were already thinking about how this is going to transform the streetscape of our future city. There is no need to own a driverless car. They will always be available. But all this will be in the hands of big companies like Uber and Tesla or Google. Without any ownership of driverless cars, there's no need for parking spaces. And this will dramatically transform the streetscape. But the real question when it comes to the future of driverless cars is, how do we cope with the question of reliability? Who is to blame in the case of an accident? And the final thing that we need to think about when we think about the city of the future is that our cities will grow older. In London, this has caused a number of different unexpected consequences. Old people are no longer moving out of the city. This has actually caused something of a problem for the housing crisis in London. But we also need to think about how do we make the city a place of care and health for our elderly? How do we design spaces which they can use? Should we be creating elderly neighbourhoods, different kinds of services, particularly health services and care services? In time, the city will have to respond to this changing dynamic within its population. But all 5 of these visions, the Internet of Things, the post-work society, the challenge of climate change, the potential mobilities and infrastructure issues, the concern and the care of an ageing population, these all challenge our understandings and assumptions about the role of technology, economics and politics in what is an urgent moment in thinking about the city. Each offers solutions, But like the mobile phone lane in Chongqing, we have to be able to think through the unexpected consequences of our decision. Now, I don't have the answers. Every city is different, and yet also I would not say that what I'm about to offer you is a set of solutions. Rather, what I want to present is a series of challenges, a series of questions that I hope you will then take and think about when you think about designing the future city yourself. I believe in a social urbanism. This is what I passionately believe, and this is what I write about. I believe that cities are made out of people, not bricks and mortar and steel and glass. When we talk about the city, we need to talk more about civics, not just about technology and economics. We need to start with the people and then build the city around them. We should prioritise the who rather than the what. We should ask questions of what kind of places we need in order to allow the flourishing of as many people as possible. I think for this reason we need to rethink some of the reasons why cities are good for us. But most important, the question who a city is for and what makes a city. In order to do that, I want to look at some examples of different ways of approaching this social urbanism. The first can be approached in this picture. This picture comes from the work of an American called William Holly White. He wrote a very famous book in the 1950s called The Organisation Man. In 1969, he started work at the planning office of New York City. And what he discovered when he arrived at the office surprised him. Because he went there and he realised that all the people before him had actually done extraordinary work transforming the city, but they had never gone back to look to see what had happened to their changes. They'd never gone to, in some ways, appreciate their work. And so he decided that actually what he would do was he would hire a group of students to go and observe the city, to actually go and see how people use the city, rather than assume that he understood better than anyone else the way that the city worked. And so with a group of students from Hunter College, stationed in various parts around the city, he got them to look at the way that ordinary people went on their ordinary lives on an everyday New York street. And one of the places was here, just outside Saks Fifth Avenue, one of the most elite shopping spots in Manhattan. Each spot, you see, represents a conversation that went on for more than 2 minutes. And what you will notice by looking at this is that people had these conversations in 2 different places. The first place was right outside the front door of the department store. The second place was on the corner of the street. So you can imagine people coming in 2 different directions, bumping into each other and having a conversation. Now this is how people use the city. And it was only when Holly White started to actually watch people and see how they used the city that we could start to understand what the city was for and who it was for and how people used it. At the same time that Holly White was watching people for the first time in Manhattan, a Danish architect called Jan Gehl was working in Copenhagen. One Christmas, he set off a central part of the city, a section called Strobitz, and he sort of made sure that no cars were in this central area. At the beginning, all the local shopkeepers and people who lived there were very angry. They thought this is going to destroy this area. No one's going to come here because they can't drive and park in this place. But within a matter of months, Strøget became the most popular and the most important public space within the city of Copenhagen. Thousands of people will come here. So Jan Gehl wanted to work out why people came here, what it was they were doing when they came to use this part of the city. And so, like Holly White, he decided to watch and observe people using the city, rather than just theorize, rather than just coming up with an assumption. And what he discovered, again, was unexpected. For one, people would stop outside the cinema to see what was showing, or looking at shop windows. The two places where people stopped the longest was firstly a building site, and secondly at street performers. And what Jan Gehl concluded was incredibly simple, but I think incredibly profound when one thinks about what cities are for. He concluded that people are interested in people, and this is why they come to these places. People attract other people. The city space, in some ways, is a creative and a social reactor. But what is happening when people come to these places? In order to tell you this, we need to go back to New York. This is Hudson Street in Greenwich Village. This is the street on which Jane Jacobs lived in the 1950s and 60s. She is a heroine of mine. She is very much somebody who informs much of my thinking about the way that cities work. And it was here at 555 Hudson Street, her own home, that she would watch the city as it went about its daily life. She would watch it over the course of the day, from the moment the shops opened to the lunchtime crowds, and then when the children returned to school. And what she discovered and what she observed was what she calls the ballet of a good sidewalk, the ballet of Hudson Street. And what she noticed is that as these individual lives and these individual people came to the street, their lives interwove. And suddenly they became more than the sum of their parts. They became more than just individuals. As they started to connect, as they started to become known to each other, a community was developed. And it was only by being in that place, by living life on the street, that this ballet was allowed to develop. Now this is very, very important, because it sounds simple, but actually there's something amazing going on. Because when these people come together, when these lives intertwine, we suddenly see what a city really is good at, what absolutely is the soul, if you like, of the city. In a recent report produced in the UK, looking at various different parts of the country, it was in this place, which is a place called St Mary's Newham, which is a marketplace, where people came together on a day-to-day basis, that people learnt the rules of being good citizens. This is really, it was through the ballet, the everyday life of being in the city, that people learnt how to live in the city. It was here that they came together, and here that strangers met. It was here that they learned the rules of being together. They came to understand the differences between each other, and they learned to share the dead spaces of the city, and in the end, to be good citizens. And this really is at the heart of what a social urbanism is if you can work and think about those simple principles and fold that into your understanding, into your planning, into your design, into your development of places, then suddenly we can start seeing that cities are just built upon people and not just on things. And this has some radical implications. But there are also other aspects that we need to fold into that understanding. I think we need to think about such things as the way that we invest into new places. The idea of time being part of the city. So much of the way that we develop the city is on a very short-term scale. And I think that is damaging to the long-term future of the city. What I mean by this is we need to, as we develop and think about our urban future, we need to rediscover the principle of co-production, of working together, all different levels in order to develop the city. That the city isn't owned by just one part of the citizenship. It isn't owned by one part of those who own, or those who govern, or those who live in certain parts. It is owned by everybody. And this is what co-production is. And the result of that, I think, is finding the commonwealth of the city. What I mean by this can be seen in this example, which comes from the Dutch city of Utrecht. At 2:30 every Saturday afternoon, a stonemason will carve a single letter, and this is then placed within the fabric of the main street of the city, and this has been going on since 2012. And each stone develops into a word, and each word then develops into a stanza, and over time this is developed into a poem. And this poem now runs through the fabric of the city. This, to me, is absolutely at the heart of what the commonwealth of the city might look like. Another thing that we need to think about as an essential part of social urbanism is trust. Trust is something that we don't talk enough about. It is as important as bricks and mortar. It's the thing that connects us as people. It's what allows the life between buildings to exist. And I want to give, again, another quick example of what I mean by trust and how it actually fits in within the fabric of the city. The urbanist Scott Burnham was commissioned in Amsterdam to create a series of different artworks. And one of them was this artwork, which is made out of nearly 300,000 pennies. And he created this over a number of days. But once it was finished, he decided that was it. People could do what they want with this artwork. If they wanted a penny, they could take a penny. If it rained, then that would also be part of the artwork. What happened the very first night is the police came with brushes and they swept up all the coins. They then put the coins into a plastic bag and handed it back to the artist and said, "Here is your artwork." That, to me, symbolises the level of distrust that runs through so much of the way that we run our cities when we should be basing it upon trust. As part of the same exhibition, Scott Burnham put this large concrete block up in the centre of the city and allowed anyone to do whatever one wanted to it. Now the assumption is that people are going to come and they're going to write something rude on it, or they're going to do some damage to it. In fact, this group of young skateboarders came and they developed a beautiful elephant out of the concrete. That, I think, is an example of if you allow trust, people will reward you for it. If you give generously to the city, do not expect the worst in return. Yet, the one thing that affects trust more than anything else is inequality. And inequality is undoubtedly at the heart of so many of our global cities. This is a picture of Rio in Brazil. You can see how thin the divide is between the very rich and the very poor. But inequality creates a geography of difference. It creates surveillance and gated communities and security. And this, I feel, is the thing that destroys trust almost more than anything else. My home city, London, the top 20% of the population are 280 times richer than the bottom 20%. If you travel 3 miles east from Oxford Circus railway station to Mile End railway station, life expectancy drops by 11 years. And yet, this is only a 15-minute journey within the same city. Inequality doesn't just have an impact in terms of geography. It changes expectations of health, of education, of mental health, as well as the equality of opportunities. So alongside the key principles within social urbanism of trust and equality, I'd like to add sustainability. The solution to the climate change crisis cannot just be found in technological innovation. Currently, there are eco-cities in China that claim to be totally green, totally sustainable, without people having to change their behaviour. But that's just not possible. We have to change our behaviour because the crisis is so desperate. But we're not going to do it unless we trust everyone else is going to be doing it with us. And we've got to equally share the burden so that the problem of sustainability is not one that is unfairly distributed. Put it another way, we cannot have a resilient city without social justice, a commitment to fairness, and this is what is central to social urbanism. So returning to Habitat 3, to that meeting that is just about to occur in Quito, right at the very heart of all the hopes of this meeting is what is called the right to the city. The right to the city. This is at the centre of their shared vision. The original idea came from the French thinker Henri Lefebvre. What he meant was that this was not a human right, like the freedom of speech or the freedom from persecution. It was not a question just of allowing everyone to be within the same urban space. It was something that was more dynamic. As he says in his writing, the right to the city was like a cry and a demand. He recognised that while the city was the place of the current problem, it was also the site of its transformation. That being part of the city is not determined by ownership or wealth, but by participation. And in consequence, our actions change and renew the city, and potentially can change ourselves. Thank you very much. Now, is there any questions? I think we have time for some questions.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. And I'm studying architecture in River Plate, and I really like the idea of trust, but how exactly can we design following this idea in our project just to create more spaces for people and to break the border between rich and poor people, but is it enough or not? because in Russia we have such problem with this, with trust. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, but well, this is the absolutely essential question. I'm not going to, I don't have enough experience of Russia to know the sort of situation, but I suspect it's the same everywhere. Trust is a difficult thing to build. Often, and I understand as an architect, your first question will always be, how do we build a solution? Perhaps we need to start before that, and before we start designing, we ask a different set of questions. I think that undoubtedly trust cannot just be resolved by the development of a public space strategy, but that, to me, is essential. We need to find the places where we can learn to trust. Trust is something that we learn. We need to find the places in which that is possible to happen. This is a long process. I don't think it's an easy solution either. But if we don't have trust, we don't have the city.
Добрый день, меня зовут Юрий Антон. Мы сейчас работаем над такой маленькой целью создать 1000 жилых городов в России и других странах. You've got the translation?
I don't have a translation.
Okay, I can speak in English.
Okay.
So we're building in Russia a community of experts and practitioners to develop 1,000 living cities. Basically, cities, we consider them as living organisms. And trust is the fabric which connects everybody within to a singular idea. And we wanted to ask you basically which cities in the world have the best practices we could learn from and develop and utilize in the Russian center.
I think there are lots of very interesting ways in which some of the cities that excite me the most are in Latin America. And I think some of the most interesting innovations are going on in Latin America. Often because what they're doing is what is called urban acupuncture, which is a word that was developed by a Brazilian called Jaime Lerner. It is a way of working at the very small scale rather than the master plan. So something that you do very locally has very big impact. So this could be a way that you develop a form of housing. So if you think of something like Alejandro Aravena in Chile, in Iquique, is doing some amazing things in which he creates half a house and then the occupier develops the rest of the house. In Caracas, there is the Urban Think Tank, which is doing something slightly larger scale, but putting in cable cars between the slums in the ceilings and in the mountains and the centre of the city. So connecting those two different parts. Also, it's about activism. It's not just about building a place, it's about participating and doing things. So one of the groups that I was very impressed with in India was a group in Bangalore called the Dirty Indians, who were totally anonymous. And you can only find them on Facebook. And what they do is secretly, they redevelop or they clean up areas of the city. So bits of the city that they're not, that have been ignored by the administration. And they will go and do that. And they will plant new plants, they will create a space which, public space which is worth being in. That's good because not only does it create a space, but it creates an activity. And is doing as much as creating that is incredibly important. So when you build these communities, it has to be built out of activity and also public space.
Спасибо, по-русски можно.
меня три связанных вопроса. Вот как вы считаете, если говорить о городах будущего, они будут как-то ограничены в размере и численности, или это могут быть совершенно гигантскими популяциями? Второй вопрос. Сохранится ли все-таки там большое различие между блистающим центром города и трущобными окраинами? И третий вопрос демографический. Все-таки в этих городах будут жить все свои населения, или это будут, например, города для молодых, или там города только для стариков, для пожилых людей? Спасибо.
Great questions, thank you. In terms of the first size, I think cities can grow as big as you want them to be. There are two ways of doing that. Either you plan it, and what is happening currently is that there are a number of cities that have decided to connect with each other in order to create what is called a mega region. So you can sort of see in America and also in Europe that there are 4 or 5 cities that have now combined into one mega region. And I think this can go on for as much as you can want it to go on. The other alternative is cities growing without planning, without management. And I think that, in some ways, goes to your second question, which is the sort of the typology of the future city. Will we see growing divisions within the urban spaces? In many cities, what is going on at the moment is something of a change, in which, for the 20th century, most of the inner cities had been abandoned. But what we're seeing in the last 15 years is a growth of a young, wealthy, in some ways the elite, moving into the inner cities and then pushing the poor to the edges. This is happening, this was planned in Paris, but this is what's happening in New York, in London, and a number of other different places. This, I think, will create a problem in the long term. Already we see that there are divisions within these different circles within the sort of city, and we have to be very careful about providing services equally between those different regions. I don't think we will necessarily see the city dividing up between young and old. I think we will see it dividing increasingly between rich and poor, and potentially also different interests. Actually, what we see in America, something called the Big Sword, is communities are becoming increasingly more polarized in terms of interests, in terms of wealth, in terms of politics. And that creates a huge disbalance. A city should be mixed. You know, cities are places where strangers meet. And we need to be able to develop those spaces where we can learn to meet, and we learn to integrate, and we learn our differences. Because if we create divided spaces where people are so tightly packed together, well, that's just a disaster. Does that answer?
First of all, thank you for a nice talk. And my question is, maybe you can make some advices for us here in Vancouver about creating public spaces in our cold climate.
It's easy to talk about activities outside of our buildings when it's hot, when it's warm, it is New York, and we have special conditions here, so we can think about this. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in terms of public spaces, from what I've seen of St. Petersburg, you have vast public spaces, and that's as much of a problem as you know, having some small public spaces. In that, how do people meet in such big open places? In addition to public spaces just being a square, we can think of it in lots of different ways. You know, a street corner can be a public space. It doesn't mean that you have to be outside the whole time. A bookshop can be a public space. What it needs to be is a place where one feels safe. It's a place where one feels that everyone is allowed. Often, so much of public space is now being policed in terms of who is allowed and who isn't allowed. So public space is a place where those kind of regulations and those kind of restrictions don't exist. So it could be a bus. You know, that is a public space. Or the metro is a public space. So it doesn't have to be a big square and thousands of people. It can be, but it can be a place where people feel the freedom of interaction without restriction, without surveillance, without some security. And if that's a coffee shop, then that's fine by me. There is no, the idea of a bookshop and a coffee shop is something that's called the third space, which I think are becoming increasingly more important. So it doesn't have to just be what we traditionally think of as large open spaces. Is there any other?
Thank you for the presentation. So my name is Ines Ronaldo, Professor at University of Montreal. So I have several questions. The first one is about the balance between the big data and the traditional social sciences methodology and understanding the city. Because as you know now, there is a lot of expectations on big data that are used in understanding cities, and so I have no opinion. My second question is about the balance between artificial intelligence and unemployment.
I'm sorry?
Unemployment. Because we understand that artificial intelligence is a product of the human thinking and the human efforts. That's what we do. And my third question is about long-term sustainability. How do you think what are the main trends and main problems now in this field? Thank you.
Okay, so let's start off with the question of big data and the way that it will influence our understandings of the way that cities work. Undoubtedly, big data is being used more and more, both in terms of government, but also in terms of social sciences, as well as in terms of the marketplace. So, Google Analytics, or data that comes off your phone. These things are absolutely driving so much of research at the moment. I would say that big data has a huge contribution to make, but I think that we are putting too much emphasis upon it. The fact that we can collect data on a vast scale and potentially that we can analyze it electronically does not necessarily change what we need to do as a result of having this data. There are definitely forms of data which will improve our understanding of the way that the cities work, but when it comes to decision making, on a political level, on a commercial level, on a policy level, it does not get rid of the fact that we need to make political decisions. If you imagine that Google are presenting their ideas at the moment, and they are gathering together everything that they collect and saying, we don't need politics, that we have reached the point of the end of power because our data is so good, we don't have to make decisions. That is not true. That is a way of saying, give us power. And Google Cities is possibly the most dangerous prospect that I see. Moving on to the sort of question of AI and unemployment. If you imagine taxis, very soon we will be able to not have taxi drivers because self-driving car or driverless cars will be able to take over the job of taxi drivers. So what happens to that whole raft of skilled labour? On top of that, we'll very soon be able to replace teaching assistants with AI. What will happen to that skilled and educated, graduate level employee? AI will not just be affecting the mechanical and sort of skilled labour, it will go all the way up to how the government works, the way that our cities are run in terms of infrastructure. It will go into classrooms. It will even go into replacing doctors in time. So they're a whole skilled class of people who could be replaced by AI. Now, what are those skilled people going to do? That is, I think, the issue of the post-work city. And I think it's something that some of really interesting conversations are going on in terms of things like universal basic income, or what happens to the post-work house if people don't go out to the office. Does the home change? If we are going to, if the majority of us are no longer going to be going to an office, there are so many other things that we can do, but there needs to be preparation for that. So that, I think, is what the kind of the future of AI might potentially offer us. And it can be a dystopian vision, or it can be something that actually liberates us, because for too long we have defined ourselves by our work. And actually we are bigger than our jobs. We are more, we have more to offer than what we do between the hours of 9 and 5. So, perhaps not going to work might be the greatest thing that ever happens to us.